so this next couple recipes uses lentils, and so lentils are part of the legume family, or very similar in the same family as beans. They're a great substitute for meat, and because they're a good source of protein, but at the same time, since they're a plant, they also have really good sources of fiber, and fiber itself really helps to lower cholesterol, and lentils themselves don't have a lot of those saturated fats and things that beef has that causes your cholesterol to spike up like that, and so they're a really good substitute for some of those meats. And so what we'll be doing today is showing you a couple different recipes of how to use lentils in place of ground beef. And so we'll be making some lentil tacos, some lentil burgers, as well as using lentils in place of ground beef for some of those things for a spaghetti sauce. And so whenever you buy your lentils, it's important to put them in a strainer and check for any stones that may have got packaged in with them. And if you find any stones, then you just pick them out. And so we measured all the lentils out that we need for our recipes, and we'll just check through it. And then if we don't see any stones or anything after that, then we'll keep them in the strainer and then just rinse them with water to get off any of the impurities or debris with them. So, and then if you have a large batch, then you can use a spoon to kind of get the ones up from the bottom and bring them to the top so that you can wash those with some water too. And so the nice thing about lentils is, instead of beans where you have to soak them overnight before you cook them, is that lentils themselves, you don't have to soak them before you cook them. You just wash them, and then you'll boil them for about 20 minutes or so, and then they'll be ready to use for your recipes, as opposed to beans where it takes almost a whole day of soaking before you can be ready to cook them.
Okay, and so what you want to do is make sure that the lentils have a good, say, inch of water on top of them. Alrighty.
So now that we have the lentils in the pot with their water, we can place it on the stove for them to boil. And so to cook lentils, what you want to do is turn it on to high, and you'll want to bring them to a boil. And then once it's boiling, you'll turn the heat down to low and then cover the pot with a lid, and then just let them simmer. And you usually want to let them simmer for about 20 minutes or so. And then at that 20-minute mark is when you'll want to check them to see if they've softened up a little bit and are ready and cooked.
And the other thing about lentils is that they're very inexpensive, and so you can buy them in bulk. And of course you do get it from the food bank. And sometimes you can cook 3 batches and make 3 different types of meals. So that way you don't have to do other cooking during the week, but you can also, once they're cooked, they keep in the refrigerator for a week. You can freeze them, and then they can keep in the freezer for 3 months. And if you don't feel like using your lentils this week, you can keep them in a jar. I have mason jars, but you may have some spaghetti sauce jars. Just clean them out, because you want them to be sealed tightly so that you can keep them in your pantry, and they will even last for a year. And if you don't have any jars, Ziplocs will do just the same thing. And so again, lentils are just so versatile. I think they're underappreciated and underutilized, and they have so many health benefits. So we will show you how to prepare wonderful meals with them.
Lentils are boiling. We'll go ahead and turn down the heat to low, and then we'll get our lid and cover off the top with the lid to keep the heat in there. And then in about 20 minutes we'll check them and make sure they're soft and see if they're cooked. Okay, so now that the lentils have been simmering for about 20 minutes, we're going to go ahead and check. And so whenever you check your food, you want to have a little bowl and your own spoon away from it to keep it sanitary. So you get a little bit of scoop of the lentils, put them in the bowl, and then you'll go ahead and taste test them. And so what you're checking for with lentils is to make sure that they're softened up and no longer hard. And so these seem pretty good. I think they're softened up quite a bit, and so I think they should be ready to use for the rest of our recipes.
And if you notice, it looks like all of the water has boiled away, but there is still some. And so what I like to do is save the water because that has some of the nutrients from the lentils that have that are now as part of the water. And you'll see with some of our recipes, especially the lentil tacos, you need to add water, and so it would be much better to use the lentil juice. I also keep it in my refrigerator, and whenever I'm making whole grains, like even if I'm making rice, to have the juice with my brown rice, it just adds a nice flavor, or really any kind of grain.
All right, so now that the lentils have finished cooking and boiling, we'll go ahead and strain them out. And then like we were saying, we want to save some of the water or the juice in the bottom since that still has a lot of good nutrients in it. And so you'll want to put a bowl under your strainer to catch all of that. And so there we go, we have the lentils strained out, and then that's the rest of the water that we boiled with it and we'll use for later. Alright, so a lot of our recipes call for onions, and so I'll walk you through some of the steps on how to cut an onion properly. And so since onions are round, the first thing you want to do is cut off the end. And so the end you want to cut off is the top of it. So this is the bottom where all the roots are. And you'll cut off the top to give you a nice flat surface to cut with. And so now that it's nice and flat, you put it on the flat end, and then you cut it in half from there. So, and then once it's cut, then it's a lot easier to peel, and so you get that first layer under there, and then peel that off with the rest of the skin. And once it's all peeled off, you can throw that into the treasure bowl. And then we'll go ahead and peel the other half. Okay, and then so to dice the onion, you'll take the onion and then you'll make kind of angled cuts into it, and then just continue with the cuts all the way throughout the onion. And then whenever you're cutting, it's important to make sure to keep your fingers in line with the claw so that you don't cut any fingers. And so the claw really helps keep your fingers out of the way of the knife. And so we're just moving down the onion. And then you really want to make sure to keep the root on, because the root keeps the onion together as you're cutting it. And you can go ahead and spin it around to make the cutting on the rest easier. Okay, and then now that it's cut all the way through, you can go ahead and cut the root off and then put that into the treasure as well. And then since it's cut, you'll go ahead and take a couple pieces off, and then you'll have them on the cutting board, and then just move down with your knife to cut them and dice it up. And so whenever you're cutting, if you have a chef's knife, you can use kind of a rocking motion with it, or any other knife. It's important to make sure you're kind of going back and forth with it, more like a sawing motion as opposed to just going straight down with.
So if you have been watching our videos, this is going to sound very familiar. Now we are making Lentil Nut Burgers. And so what we're going to do is heat up our vegetables. So I have this on a medium heat. I've heated my pan. I will add some oil until I see it glistening. And then I will add my onion. And the heats that we use, it's a very safe temperature for olive oil. If you are frying, olive oil is not the best oil to use. I would suggest avocado oil, which has a very high smoke point. Or if you're doing some kind of a stir fry, you may want to use one of the nut oils like sesame oil, which again has a very high smoke point, which means the point at which the oil starts to burn and smoke, and you do not want that to happen. So this looks glistening. Let's do our little test with our water. And if you remember, usually the first thing we add are our onions. And so adding ingredients will just lower the temperature of the pan. So we start with the onions, and then I usually add just a little pinch of salt. I like to layer the flavors in the food. So we are going to let this cook a little bit. That's a big chunk of onion. I know if I serve that to my family, someone would be complaining. Ma! Not that I have children. Yeah, Laura! And the other pointer I can give you is when things look like they need some moisture, instead of putting olive oil on the pan, you can actually use your water again, which will again moisturize the vegetables and really help bring out the sweetness. And so the version that we're making today is we're going to cook all of the vegetables first, and then we're going to add it to our lentils. But what you can also do is you could puree all of the vegetables and then cook the puree. You don't want it to be like a paste, but that's another way of doing it. It depends on whether your family likes part of your chunks of and can actually see the ingredients, or if you want it all uniform. Okay, so our onions look nice and softened, so it's time to add some more vegetables to this. So let me add a little bit of oil, and why don't I do the mushrooms next? And I want the red peppers to get soft too. So I will add a little bit more oil, add my red pepper, add a pinch of salt. And we'll let that cook down a little bit. And then I'll add the garlic. I wouldn't add the garlic right now, just because I really want this to cook down a little bit. And it also, I want to lower this. so it doesn't burn. And if you feel that it is getting a little bit too hot, the other thing that you can do, rather than adding oil, you can take some water and go like so. And so we're gonna let this cook for, I don't know, 5 or 7 minutes, and then we'll add the garlic. But in the meantime, we'll get the other ingredients ready for the lentil burgers. Okay, so while our vegetables are still softening on the stove, we're gonna get our lentils ready. So here are our cooked lentils. And then we add, this is some apple cider vinegar. And then we mash them. And so this is going to be the base. We're going to add the vegetables, and then along with the vegetables, we'll add other things like I'm actually going to be adding chopped almonds. So you could add your favorite nut or nut butter. Again, nuts have healthy fats. They also have healthy proteins. And another way of expanding and also binding these burgers together is that you use grains. And since we did enough cooking today, I'm just going to use rolled oats. So that way we didn't have to cook grains, but you could use quinoa, you could use brown rice, really experiment. And then to help bind things together, we have a beaten egg. What we're trying to do is have it resemble ground beef. Oh, the other thing that you can use is a potato masher, which I forgot I had in the drawer over there. So that's the other thing that you can use to mash. But this does the job too, as you can see. Okay. Both methods. Okay, so we were waiting on the peppers, which took a little bit longer. If you do a smaller dice, it may not take as long. So, last, we add this and the garlic. And we were going to put a teaspoon of cumin in this, right? Yeah. So we want the garlic to heat up first. And again, the spices that you choose to use in this, again, depends on what your family likes. So let's have that garlic soften up a little bit. So we decided we would do cumin.
Just a little cooler.
Okay. And I'm just going to add a little bit more oil to really cause that cumin to be aromatic. And you can also cut up fresh herbs. For instance, cilantro might be nice as we mash all of this into the lentils. You can also mince some baby spinach. Again, vegetables are just so healthy, and you really want to eat all colors of the rainbow. So I think this is going to be ready to add to our lentils. Okay, so when I was just talking earlier and I said, oh, cilantro would taste nice in these burgers, I remembered I had some cilantro in the refrigerator. And so I've washed it, and what I wanted to point out with regards to cilantro, and luckily my family does not have the gene that if you eat cilantro, it tastes like soap. So I apologize for those people that have that gene, because cilantro is such a flavorful, healthy herb. And so most of the flavor is actually in the stem. And so there's really no need to take all the leaves off like sometimes you do with other herbs. And so what you can do is just simply chop stem, leaves, and then you can mince it until, whether you like larger pieces so people know that the fresh herb is in there, or smaller. I love cilantro if you're somebody who can eat it, because if you buy packaged salsa, what you can do is just cut up some fresh cilantro and add a squeeze of lime, and it tastes like you made it yourself, and your guests will be very surprised. Okay, all right, so I've washed my hands because you want, what we're going to be doing now is forming patties and then putting it into the breadcrumbs of your choice. You do not need to use the breadcrumbs. And then I'm going to use the wax paper to keep them separate. And then once we make the patties, they need to chill in the refrigerator for at least 15 minutes before we start sauteing them. So. Alrighty, and you just dust it a little bit. You could make any size that you want. And in fact, you don't necessarily have to have this with a roll. You could use other options like a leaf of butter lettuce. You can do that. And have it that way. And they're a little mushy now, but that's why you put them in the refrigerator. The other thing that you can do is double the recipe, and you can actually, at this step after you've made them, you can put them in a Ziploc bag and put them in your freezer, so that way, you know, when you come home and you don't have a lot of time, you can just take them out of the freezer. They really don't need to be thawed. And so you can have a nice, quick, healthy dinner for your family. Okay. Okay, so let me put the burner on to medium. And similar to what we had talked about earlier, we want this to heat up, and then once the pan is hot, we will add the olive oil. But I just wanted to point out that I took the burgers out of the refrigerator, and so the recipe that you get made, 2, 4, 6, 7 burgers. And so I'll just show you cooking up 2 burgers, because I would like to put the rest of these in my freezer so that after a long day of work, it's just so simple to make dinner by just doing the same thing. Even though they're frozen, it'll just take a little bit longer for them to cook. But you have to realize that the vegetables are cooked, the lentils are cooked. Really, what's not cooked is the egg, which is going to bind them together. put some oil in the pan and we let that glisten. And the secret of this is that you have to let them cook in the pan for a good 3 to 5 minutes and then turn them over. It's not like a hamburger, ground beef burger, where you're flipping it back and forth, because again, these are vegetables. You have the binders of your grain and your egg, but if you keep flipping it back and forth, it's going to disrupt it and you're going to get a crumbly burger. So what you want is to really get a nice char, nice brown sheen to the burger before you flip it over, and that's going to take 3 to 5 minutes. And it seems to be pretty warm. Let's do our technique. Yes, it is. Ooh, well, we learned don't throw it in. Here, I'll make 3 so that you gently put it in. And then you let that sit. And then what I will also do is, before I turn them over, I would add more olive oil and then turn it over so that it goes into some more olive oil. Okay, and we'll let these cook for a little bit. Okay, so I actually took a little look at the broken one and there was a nice brown. So I add a little bit of olive oil, and then that way, then with this one, I will put it into the olive oil. Add a little olive oil. And have it go in. Ooh, that's a nice one. And then the last one. And this seems to be cooking with a nice brown, so actually, and it's fine that it's crumbled, because you know what I'll do is I'll put it on top of a salad, and that will be nice. But what I'm going to do is turn down the heat.